continue to get your coffee. I'm going to start, but you should feel free to do what you need to do. Good evening and welcome to the John Calvin McNair Lecture. As Alan noted, it's the 9th one held here at St. Andrews, and we're delighted that all of you are here tonight. We have an overflow crowd, which is terrific. I'm not going to recite for you the information that's in the program, other than to say that it's pretty clear, no question, that Dr. Paul Mueller is a great fan of being a student. A bachelor's degree, 4 master's degrees, a PhD, you can read about it in the program. But what's fascinating to me is the range of the areas that he studied during those times while he was a student. And I think that highlights one of the reasons why he's here tonight, because he's thought about things deeply in a wide array of intellectual traditions. And we're looking forward to hearing how that all comes together in an interdisciplinary way. So it's perfect. He's also been a teacher, as you can tell, again, from the material in front of you, both a college preparatory teacher, a college professor at Loyola, he's been an academic dean, and of course now, as you see, and I have to make sure I say it in exactly the right order, the religious superior of the Jesuit Community at the Vatican Observatory. Who the heck knew the Vatican had an observatory? I didn't. I guess Galileo left it for them. But we won't go there. I had the good fortune to have dinner last night with Father Mueller, along with Tim Beach-Verhey and Tanner Capps, our 2 faculty members in religious studies, and we had a great time, along with Alan Dotson, who was there to join us as well. And I think what we picked up is that you're in for quite a treat tonight, because Paul has a great sense of humor and a deep and abiding faith and an interesting perspective on the relationship between science and theology. And you're going to hear that tonight. So without further ado, Father Paul Mueller.
Thank you very much for that very gracious and warm welcome. And it's a delight and privilege to be here with you this evening. I'm just grateful for the opportunity to come back to North Carolina for the first time in about 20 years, and also to offer some reflections in the spirit of the McNair Lecture, which, as I understand it, is to show the mutual bearing of science and theology upon each other. I'll jump in. My remarks will be in 2 main parts. So if you tune out for one part, you can come back. Whatever works for you there. First, I'm going to talk about the Vatican Observatory. That's where I live and work. I have a feeling it's my connection with that institution that gets me here tonight. So you probably want to hear something about that place. What is it? What does it do? Why does it exist at all? Isn't it kind of a contradiction in terms, since we all know science and religion are opposed to each other? That's the first part. Second part, I'm going to talk about something kind of interest to me. I'd say it's about our experience of things unseen, whether that's in science or in religion. We believe that scientific instruments and technology extend the reach of human senses, making it possible for us to see and experience things that would otherwise be invisible to us, beyond our possible experience. Via scientific instruments, we see somehow electrons, neutrons, black holes, and the like. They become part of our experience. But wait a minute, isn't it religion that's supposed to be concerned with things unseen? So, that's the second part, talking about things unseen and how we relate to them. So first, the Vatican Observatory, let's see if my clicker will work. It worked. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I can see half of you really well. Half of you are bathed in soothing darkness. Hope you enjoy it. The Vatican Observatory is an astronomical observatory owned and operated by the Vatican, by the Pope. It's entrusted to the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. It's a group of Catholic priests and brothers, of which I am a member. We have a Catholic contingent here tonight, I do believe. There's a little Catholic invasion happening here tonight on this campus. Thank you for the support. Good to be with you. The Vatican Observatory is entrusted to the Jesuits since the teens of the last century to operate it. There are, nowadays, 2 locations. The headquarters and the older telescopes are in Italy at Castel Gandolfo, and there is a modern telescope near Tucson in Arizona. Castel Gandolfo in Italy, that is, by the way, the summer vacation home of the Pope. There's his modest summer vacation home. And you can see it's got 2 telescope domes on top of it. And also in the nearby, adjacent papal gardens, 2 more telescope domes. There's 4 telescope domes at Castel Gandolfo, Italy, at the Pope's modest vacation home, which Pope Francis seems not to be using, by the way. He seems to be a city boy, near as I can tell. Okay, Castel Gandolfo, see if I'm on the right slide here. Nothing happened. There we go. There's a couple other shots at Castel Gandolfo. It's a pretty place. I get to live in a pretty place. It's in the volcanic region, southeast of Rome, 15 miles southeast of Rome. It's next to a crater lake. So there's the Pope's modest vacation home, 2 views of it, with the crater lake down below. Those busy Romans tunneled through that crater, through a kilometer and a half of solid rock to make a drain to keep that lake from ever flooding. Those Romans just chewed through rock. Great restaurants, great food, and in that adjacent papal gardens, there is an operating farm which provides food for the Pope, which I'm getting all too much of. Great, it's just a beautiful, I'm privileged to live there. It's a beautiful place to live. There are 4 telescopes there in those 4 domes. There's, you can read the names. This is the oldest one. It was a telescope used as part of an international project to map the heavens. There's the double astrograph. And then there's the refractor. Big good, you can look through the refractor and see beautiful things. And the Schmidt telescope. Also at Castel Gandolfo, I don't want to rush with these pictures, but also at Castel Gandolfo, we have one of the world's largest meteorite collections. The core of that collection was given by a noble French couple decades ago, and we've added to it. So we have scientists doing all kinds of physical examination and analysis of meteorites. We have 1,100 pieces of 500 meteorites, which have fallen over the world. Brother Consul Magno, a member of our staff, is a meteorite expert, and he actually has an asteroid named after him up there somewhere. His colleagues gave him that honor. And over there you see Pope Benedict holding, this is when he came to our new headquarters to dedicate them, he's actually holding what is pretty much believed to be a piece of Mars that fell to Earth. It somehow got blasted off of Mars and went flying through space and landed here. And they did tests and they figured out that one's from Mars. So the next day, of course, the Roman paper, Pope holds Mars in his hands. Whatever. So that's the Castel Gandolfo location, some of the things going on there. At the Tucson location, why are we there? At Castel Gandolfo, you can no longer do research observational astronomy. It's too low, there's too much light, the telescopes are too old, too much pollution, you name it. So since the late 80s and early 90s, there's been a telescope, a modern telescope, on a mountaintop outside of Tucson, owned and operated by the Vatican. It's called the VAT, the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. Kind of presumptuous. The mirror at the heart of that telescope is 1.8 meters in diameter, about as big as I am tall. And it's the first mirror ever made by a new process that was invented right there at Tucson, University of Arizona. Basically, the Vatican Observatory is affiliated, has an affiliation relationship with the University of Arizona Astronomy Department. So working with them, let's put it this way, our director was buddies with this guy who was inventing a new way to make telescope mirrors. His name was Roger Angel. Roger Angel made a deal with our director, said, George, old buddy, old pal, if my new method of making mirrors works, you can have the first one, if you'll raise the money to build the telescope mounted to go with it. Well, it worked. And he made that, I'll describe later how he made it, but he made that mirror in what used to be a synagogue. So it's a case of an angel making a mirror in a synagogue in the Vatican, and we're all deeply confused by that. I'll talk more about that mirror later, because that's the first of a whole new generation of telescope mirrors which have changed ground-based astronomy. On the same mountaintop where the Vatican has its nice but modest telescope, there are two much bigger telescopes. There's the sub-millimeter radio telescope and the large binocular telescope. This telescope, you can see, has two mirrors made by that same new process. Each of those mirrors is 8.4 meters across. Big. Those are two big mirrors. They can make them that big now. What do we do at the Vatican Observatory? As little as possible. But that's actually a joke. A journalist, asked Pope John XXIII how many people work in the Vatican. His reply was, about half. So, what do we do? Well, this is a quick sum of people I really work with. There's 13 Jesuits on the observatory staff, all scientists. I'm the lone philosopher. And these are their specialties. I won't go through them all. But what you'll notice is a lot of research institutes would have a focus. Here's the thing that we're all doing, the project we're all cooperating on. This is a weird research institute in many ways, but it's weird in the particular sense that it's very outward-looking. Instead of a common project, in some ways our scientific mission from the Pope is to be the face of the Vatican to the world of science. So instead of looking inward and having projects in common, we tend to have circles of collaborators outside, which means if they're the superior trying to maintain a good home life, they're all running out doing other things. It's kind of hard to do. So, another thing we do, along with just the research that everyone does, every 2 summers, the Vatican Observatory runs a month-long summer school in astronomy. Any science students here who want a month in Italy? If you're in the physical sciences, we just did it this summer. The next time will be summer of 2016, competitive application. It's 25 students, no more than 2 from the same country, a month-long intensive program in some particular aspect of astronomy, and it's a lovely month. This particular time, we did galaxies near and far, young and old, and there's some of the students. This is the last night we had them out to dinner, and a very diverse group of students, no more than 2 from the same country, and we actually, at the end of our time for those students, had a meeting with Pope Francis in the Palace of the Vatican for the students. And you saw this young student here. The students are very diverse. They're Muslims, Christians, Jews, all faiths, male, female. It's very touching for me to see the young Muslim student greeting the Pope like this, because you don't shake hands, and he just greet her like that right back. Roll with the punches perfectly. But if you want a little month in Italy, apply. Apply for the summer school. Part of the interest and fun of being at the Vatican Observatory is that popes stop by from time to time, and take a look at the equipment. So here you have a couple popes from the past, a couple more popes from the past, and a little more recent. There's Pope Benedict checking out a microscope. Pope Francis came by last summer, and I was so annoyed because it came on 5 days' notice. I was in this country at the time. I was due to return the following day. He came on a Sunday. I was supposed to come back on that Monday. So you think, move your flight up. But I was doing a wedding that weekend for the daughter of my best friend. Can't run out from a wedding, right? No way. Can't do it. But the father of the bride announced, we're grateful to Father Paul, who's skipping lunch with Pope Francis to be here to do this wedding. It was literally true. But they had a lovely lunch, 9 Jesuits and Pope Francis around the dining room table, and it was a good visit for them. That's a quick survey of some of the activities of the observatory, but always, when you talk about the Vatican Observatory, the first question that people always ask is, why on earth does the Pope have an astronomical observatory? My initial answer, admittedly somewhat flippant, It is to say, why is the Astronomical Observatory? Well, because a particle accelerator would be much too expensive for us. The premise of the question is, why are you mixing science and religion? From my point of view, of course we're mixing science and religion. This is just how we can afford to do it. Now, that's flippant. I realize people have real questions about science and religion, but I wish we could afford an accelerator. Our daily experience is not one of separation of science and faith. My lived experience is that science and religion are distinct, but not disconnected. We work together in the lab, we pray together in the chapel, we go to Mass together, we go to scientific conferences together. Conflict between science and faith is not my experience, and at least it's not the position of the Catholic Church. I know different denominations struggle with that question in different ways. I'm going to take a minute to sort of talk through my take on kind of a Catholic position, for what it's worth. We can have a fight later, about science and faith. The Catholic position on that, whoops, got a little funny thing going on there. We never got to the second, oh, I see, we didn't get to the second thing. I thought we did. There, we were supposed to be there that whole time. There's my accelerator. Next time it does that, let me know. I didn't see it, because I can't see it from here too easy. So, that was supposed to be the punchline for the previous joke. Kind of a Catholic position on science faith, and this is not, well anyway, let's just jump into it. Most recently elaborated by John Paul II, but you can find it implicitly as far back as Augustine in his commentary on Genesis. And it could be summarized as, we have faith in the unity of truth. Or you might say faith in the ultimate eschatological unity of truth. Meaning, it's not that there's two different disconnected truths, one from science, one from religion. It's one and the same God is the author of both books, the book of Scripture and the book of nature, and God does not disagree with God. One and the same God writing both books. God's revealed in and through history, and our way of grappling with that and taking that on is through Scripture. God is revealed through nature, and that Scripture's reflection on something happened at a particular place in time in history. That's a witness we depend on. We need that Scripture. But nature's here around us all the time. It's something we all have access to. So God's revealed through both books, and God does not contradict God. Here's a little something John Paul II, I'm not going to go through it, but in his encyclical, Fides et Ratio, Faith and Reason, he reflected on this question a little bit. And you can read it for yourself. I won't dwell on it. But the point is, we don't worry so much about, do we worry about how to reconcile science and Scripture? Yes, of course, that's a worry. But it's not like they're two immovable objects. We operate from the position that we have faith that in the end, when we finally understand how to interpret Scripture correctly, when we finally know the world through science correctly, they cannot disagree, because it is one and the same God who made both and who wrote both those books. So if there seems to be some disagreement between Scripture and science, between faith and science, don't panic. Don't panic. Have faith. And that's my main frustration, at least you see it more in this country than Italy. Some of the wars you can kind of see between new atheists on one side and kind of certain brands of fundamentalist Christians on the other. Folks, have faith. Don't panic. Our understanding is now imperfect. It'll be better in the end. And by the way, we humans are made in God's image. Human reason is made in the image of divine reason. So when we use reason to analyze and investigate this world, when we do science, we are imitating God. We are revealing God. And our faith is that God is somehow revealed by what we discover in doing science and by the very act of doing science. So, bottom line, faith in the eschatological unity of truth. Patience with seeming discrepancies in the short term. And the short term could be a long time, right? We've been waiting a long time for Jesus to come back. Circling back to the Vatican Observatory. How am I doing? Okay, let's move it along. You have to watch here. Trying to watch the clock. Vatican established its own observatory shortly after the reform of the Gregorian calendar in the early 1600s. This book, by the way, I'm going to throw a few books at you if you're looking for some reading. This is an absolutely charming book, written ostensibly for children, Tebaldo and the Hole in the Calendar. Written actually by a former philosophy professor of mine. He tried to tell you the whole story of why the calendar changed through the eyes of a young boy of that fictional boy of that period, whose birthday is going to get skipped over when the calendar changes. And he's upset. He goes to tell the Pope about it. But along the way, the whole story is told. It's in that epic, coming out of the calendar reform, the Vatican gets itself an observatory. It was located at the start in the Tower of the Winds in Vatican City, which is located atop what's now, whoops, there we go again. Did I get my circle? There should be a circle there. No? Did it show up? Let's try it again. There it is. Thank you. I couldn't see what I was doing. Tower of the Winds atop was now the Vatican Observatory. Some basic scientific instruments there in the 1600s, 1700s. And the Tower of the Winds was, okay, oh, there we go. There's the Tower of the Winds. This room atop the tower was decorated beautifully, and it's hard to see. There's a little hole up in the middle of that wall. It turns out it's a solar observatory. It's set up, there we go. It's set up so that a beam of sunlight can come in and hit the line on the floor and measure where the sun is at noon each day. And by the way, another book you may like. This is a fabulous book if you're into history of science. The Sun in the Church by John Heilbronn, who's a great historian of science. This is a sumptuous, pictured history of how cathedrals of Europe were used as solar observatories. It's great just for the pictures. Anyway, that's where the Vatican Observatory starts out. Later, it ends up, the Church of St. Ignatius in Rome, which is where the Jesuits Roman College is located, was supposed to have a dome on top of the church. It never got built. They ran out of money, they had legal troubles, so they painted a fake dome on the inside. The Jesuits are sneaky. They painted a fake dome. You walk inside and you think there's a dome, but there isn't. But up on top of the church, because it was strong enough to hold a dome, they had an astronomical observatory in the 1800s. Located up here. There's just ruins left now. Italy took all the equipment at the end of the Risorgimento. Famous Jesuit astronomer worked there in the 1800s. This guy is kind of the father of modern astrophysics in some ways. He's one of the first guys to do stellar spectroscopy and categorize stars by their spectra. And so we like him. Okay. Later, so that's a second stage of the observatory. A later stage of the observatory is when it comes when it gets refounded. Okay, let me back up. Italy takes all the equipment away in 1870 because of their seizing all the church's property. So there's no observatory for about 20 years. Then in 1891, Pope Leo decides to refound the observatory. And it's right back there in Vatican City, Tower of the Winds. But before long, nothing happened. Come on. What's happening there? There, got it. 2 more telescope domes circled there on the walls of Vatican City. So you had all these telescopes around the Vatican in the 1890s and into the early part of the 20th century. Explicit mission of the church that Pope Leo gave it to it, of the observatory Pope Leo gave it to it in that period, was to show the church's esteem for science. That's what he wanted them to do. Participate in science, show esteem for science. But people would say the second reason the observatory gets refounded in 1891 is this is the period when Italy's taken over the church's property and it's in question whether the Vatican is still a country or not. What do real countries have? They have national observatories. So it's kind of a political statement too, maybe, to have an observatory. the end of the 20s, Italy restores land of the church, and the observatory moves out to Castro Godolpho, as we discussed, to escape light pollution and to get a little higher up and all that sort of thing. Later on, as I discussed, they also opened a second location in Tucson in search of darker skies and higher altitudes. Okay, that's a quick, not as quick as I wanted, but a quick tour of the Vatican Observatory. Now I'm going to shift gears, and we can talk about the observatory. I got all kinds of gossip about, we can talk. But let me talk about things seen and things unseen. When our friend Galileo, so shift the gears here. When our friend Galileo looked through his telescope, he observed things that no one had ever seen before. Things that no one ever knew existed. He published his results in a famous book, The Starry Messenger, Sidereus Nuncius. It caused a sensation throughout Europe. What did Galileo see through his telescope? Among other things, he saw craters and mountains on the moon. No one had seen that. Everyone thought the moon was perfectly smooth. Not everyone, but it was assumed the moon is perfectly smooth. This was a surprise. He saw all kinds of stars that no one had seen before. It's hard to see from where you're sitting, but this is a map of part of the constellation Orion in Galileo's book. It's Orion's belt, 3 bright stars across the top, and this sword hanging down. What Galileo's trying to show you is all the extra stars he's seeing that you can't see without his telescope. Look what's up there, more stars. Galileo also charts the motion. He looks at Jupiter, and he sees 4 stars near Jupiter, and he notices those 4 stars seem to follow Jupiter night after night, and he concludes that they are small planets, we would say moons, going around Jupiter. That's how it looks. Galileo never saw it that nice. That's how it looks to us, moons of Jupiter. So Galileo, those are 3 things, among others, he saw in the heavens that were new. No one had ever seen before. They were things unseen. Galileo had trouble getting some people to believe that the things he was seeing were really there. People were reluctant to believe it. In Galileo's day, it seemed pretty obvious to people that God, though unseen, was real. There was an awful lot of theological and social support, structural support, to take God to be real, though God's unseen. Hardly anyone didn't believe in God in Galileo's time. But to believe in the real existence of strange physical phenomena that no one has seen before and can be seen only through a newfangled gizmo, that's a leap. That's another matter. Right? Because it's not at all obvious that putting something between your eye and what you're looking at should help. If you haven't done this before, if this is a new thing, why do you think that's going to help? Shouldn't that get in the way? And by the way, you're pointing out these things in your telescope. How do I know they're not artifacts introduced by the telescope itself? How do those things you're seeing are real? Nowadays, we all take it for granted. We take it as given that what we see through a telescope is real. That wasn't clear in the early going. Those criticisms were fair criticisms of Galileo, which he answered. There's a nice modern answer from, and it's been given many times, but there's a philosopher of science named Ian Hacking who writes a classical article, Do We See Through a Microscope? He says, look, the way we know what you're seeing is real, it's not an artifact, is that you can see the same thing by different methods. You know, maybe by an electron microscope and by a visible light microscope. If you use different physical processes, it's real. So you can get around that question, that difficulty. Anyway, in Galileo's day, it was all too easy to believe in the existence of the unseen God. It was harder to believe in the existence of things seen only through a telescope. Craters of the moon, moons of Jupiter. Nowadays, I would say the situation is reversed. We find it pretty easy to believe in the existence of things like this. And I think last year you had a speaker here on the Hubble telescope who probably showed you even better versions of the same pictures. These beautiful, beautiful astronomical pictures which we all see. And we find them lovely, we find them attractive. It's fairly easy for us to take the word of scientists, take it on faith from scientists, believe scientists, that these things are really there and look like that. Lost my page. These things, I would go so far as to say, the existence of things like this, and am I on the right page? I am. Let's try another one. This is a deep field view of galaxies in the far, far distance with even gravitational lensing going on. And this is an even more beautiful picture from my point of view. This is the Horsehead Nebula in infrared light. And just the beautiful structures there amaze me. I'm sure you saw more beautiful pictures last year. So, we see these pictures, we take them to be showing us something real. We're a little bit less sure about the existence of God these days. There's less support for that belief. Okay, let's think about this image. Every detail of that image corresponds to some real structure in the Horsehead Nebula. But the problem is the Horsehead Nebula doesn't really look like that. It's kind of a funny thing I just said there. Every detail there corresponds to something real in the Horsehead Nebula, but it doesn't really look like that. If you had access to the Spaceship Enterprise and you went flying out in space to a vantage point from which it ought to look like that, it won't look like that. Number one, this is an image made in infrared light. We can't see infrared light. Number two, this image combines light far, far dimmer and far, far brighter than our eyes could put together. If we were seeing this from that vantage point, and if we could see infrared, most of it would be empty space for us. It would be too dim for us to see, and the parts that were bright would wash out the rest of the picture. What the clever imagists, the picture makers, have done is take a wide, wide range of brightness and dimness and crunch it down to make it into a picture that we can see and interpret, that corresponds to things that are real, but it doesn't really look that way. And this gives me interesting mixed feelings. What makes it, so we're going to circle back to that, but just think about it. We got something that's beautiful, something that causes me awe and wonder, something which I want to be real, something which I believe is real, but it doesn't really quite look like that, if you could be there and look at it. That leaves me feeling kind of torn. Let's digress. What makes it possible nowadays? What steps beyond Galileo? Okay, we're going to bring this thing home soon. The president said I'm good. All right. What makes it possible to construct images like this? I'll point to quickly the three modern technologies that help with this. Whoops, there's my little problem again. There we go. University of Arizona is the place I mentioned. Under the football stands, there is now a mirror factory. You can go there and take tours where they're making those 8.4 meter mirrors by a new technology. And there's the two mirrors for that large binocular telescope. The new technology is this crazy thing where they have a big furnace, get a big flat pan, put ultra pure glass beads into it, put the lid in the furnace, heat it up, spin the furnace, and the glass melts and goes gloop, 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 right to the shape you want. Let it cool off, polish it up, put aluminum on it. Aluminum's not there yet, you've got a mirror. 8.4 meters they're making them, no bigger than that. Why? Can't fit under those highway overpasses if you go bigger than 8.4 meters. You got to take them somewhere. So there's these incredible, huge mirrors. And the great advantage of these mirrors, because of how they're made, they're much lighter and more rigid and freer of stress cracks. They heat up and cool off more quickly. I can talk later why that is. But they found a way to make them where they're much, much better. Bigger, better, more steeply curved. Lots of advantages, which has revolutionized ground-based astronomy. One of three reasons. Second reason, adaptive optics. This actually comes out of the Star Wars research. It's a side effect. What this is you can take the smaller focusing mirror and in real time, these are little pistons, in real time change the shape of the mirror to compensate for the atmospheric distortion. You can cancel out the twinkling. So you've got a much bigger mirror with a focusing apparatus which cancels out the twinkling, and, well, my time is up. And here's the clincher. You wouldn't think about this. Those little cameras you have, electric cameras, the CCD chips, have absolutely revolutionized astronomy. because that is the way you get light from super dim to super bright and register it all. Your eye can't do that. The old photographic plates can't do that. They just get washed out. But those CCD chips can register incredibly dim light and incredibly bright light and keep it all in relative proportion. And therefore you can take that wide range and mush it down to the kind of image that I mentioned. See where we ended up here? Whoops. For example, here's an old image of the Horsehead Nebula through a very good old optical telescope. Look what happens when you use, instead of a photographic plate, a CCD chip. That's the same thing, but with better, bigger mirror, more light, adaptive optics, and that CCD chip to crunch all the light down. So we're seeing things that are incredibly beautiful. But let's think about what we do with those CCD chips. They have, I find this beautiful. Okay, it's a thing of beauty. It's got a certain wow factor. And I think the people who created the image wanted it to have a wow factor. A similar but different wow factor is at work here. This is the roof of the Sistine Chapel. Here's an attempt, if the Horsehead Nebula image that I showed you is an attempt to show you something real in the heavens that we cannot otherwise see, a physical phenomenon that we cannot otherwise see. This is an attempt to show you something real about a spiritual reality with a wow factor. Michelangelo has got a certain wow factor. Michelangelo knows, you and I know, that God is not really a bearded, white-haired old man. But there are references in Scripture to God as Father. And you and I know that God can't really be a father the way you men are fathers, because God doesn't have a body like you do. But we know there's something true, at least we believe, that there's something true about calling God Father. It doesn't capture everything about God, it's not perfectly right, but there's something right about it. We believe that. And Michelangelo has found a way to represent that to us, to represent God as Father with a wow factor. And to me, I guess the point I'm trying to get at is that both in the creation of those scientific images and in this image, you have people who have interpreted. And that's a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing about the science or the faith. When you're talking about physical things that are unseen, and you're going to try and show them, you have no choice but to interpret. When you're talking about spiritual realities that we experience somehow, you have no choice but to interpret. You're somehow moving beyond a literal representation, and that means the artist or the technologist is bringing in a bit of artistic enhancement and interpretation, a wow factor. And that wow factor leads us to awe and wonder, and I think that's a good thing. Now, you might object. Someone might object. Okay, Mueller, are you going for some kind of false equivalence between science and religion? No, no, no. That's not my point at all. Science is concerned with representing and modeling physical phenomena. Faith is concerned with symbolizing spiritual realities. Those are different playing fields. Both of them represent things unseen, but different kinds of things unseen. And you can't do a literal representation either way. Then you might say, Mueller, fair point, but you know what? At least the scientific image is, it's superior to the religious image because the scientific image, each element of it corresponds point by point to some real structure of the physical phenomenon in question. And that correspondence is based on the application of objective, empirical methods of science. That kind of, and that same kind of correspondence just isn't there, can't be there, for a religious image. Exactly right. Exactly right. The religious image is dealing with a level of analogy and symbol. It's not the same kind of image as a scientific image. However, so that's not even a point to concede, it's just noting a difference. Religion shouldn't try to do the same thing as science. That's not the point. But, let me very, very quickly, very quickly, point to two or three aspects of that objective empirical method of science which I think some recent scholarship is showing in fun ways, grow out of the religious milieu. And the point is not to say, ha, science, you grow out of religion. No, that's not, the point is just to show there's a continuity, and that maybe science should be seen not in opposition to religion, but as kind of a specification of a broader way of proceeding, which is religion. Whoops. Now I'm putting these book titles up here. These books are not popular books. These are scholarly books. If there's any Renaissance scholars out there, people who are into history, you might enjoy these books. The rest of you, I've got a book for you at the end, which I'm going to mention. But these are just books for some scholars who are interested. This is Lorraine Daston, Elizabeth Lubbock have a beautiful book called Histories of Scientific Observation. This book does a lovely job, for those who might be interested, that's not a point to it, of showing a continuity between the kind of observations that monks made, medieval monks made, day in, day out, watching the sun, the stars. Why? Because your community needs to know when to pray. You got to get the hours of prayer right. So there's a very practical reason to watch the stars and the sun, because your soul depends on praying at the right time. This book argues in great detail and beautifully for a continuity from that kind of observation in religious communities to the modern notions and practice of regular scientific objective observation and crucial experiences, crucial observations of particular phenomena. It's a lovely scholarly book. I just point to it. A second thing I'd like to point to, just in passing, this is not a book that didn't come out very well. Communicating Observations in Early Modern Letters. That's actually not the one I wanted. That's the one I wanted. Okay, so I went too fast. Communicating Observations in Early Modern Letters. Here's my little schematic thing for this author's point. I can go back to that slide later. I went too fast through it. This author is trying to argue that, look, a problem that comes up in modern science is when you become empirical, you got to start combining observations. You got to, you're getting letters from people in Vienna and Paris and Rome. They're each making observations of the world. Well, we think they should agree. How do I combine discordant observations, dealing with the errors, combine them to get the one combined observation that represents the best fit? Nowadays, you go with statistics, right? Good mathematical tools. That didn't exist then. What this author has done a nice job of showing is that the first ready-to-hand tool for those first scientists to combine observations was the logic of philology, the logic that people who studied texts used. If you had various manuscripts of the same biblical book or of a text from Aristotle that had been copied and recopied and recopied by scholars and were full of errors, you somehow combine those various texts to get what is the best true version of the book of the Gospel of Mark or a chapter of Aristotle. There's a certain logic of philology, logic of text criticism, which this author claims was the first logic of science, of empirical science. Well, I find that fun. The first thing that was empirical was not science, but philology. That's an aside for the scholars in the room who want to pursue the Renaissance thing. We can talk more if you want. Let's bring this home. Okay. 10 minutes longer than promised, but we'll get there. We're good. Final kind of fervorino here. I want to talk about the concept of mystery in science and in religion. So I think this is another point of contact and a good point of comparison in the context we're going, and it fits in line with daily life. In science, if you talk about mystery, what do you do with a mystery in science? You want to get rid of it. You want to solve it. You want to make it go away. That's what mysteries are, problems to be solved. And people of science sometimes find religion strange because the mysteries seem not to go away. Here's a mystery from my life. When I was a kid, I had my own little telescope. And I used to go out night after night and look at the stars with my telescope. One of the things I saw was the galaxy of Andromeda, which you can see with your naked eye, if it's clear out, a little fuzzy patch up there, if you know where to look. Just a little fuzzy patch. Now look at it through my telescope, It didn't look this now. There we go. It didn't even look that good, but what I saw was kind of an oblong, little fuzzy disk about the same size as the planet Jupiter looked to me through my telescope. That's how Andromeda looked to me. That's what I thought Andromeda was. Now, I knew from reading books that Andromeda, if you can drive the Hubble Space Telescope, looks like that. But that's not what I'm seeing. But I thought, okay, that's that patch I'm seeing in the sky. Only when I got to the Vatican Observatory did my new colleague, Guy Consolmagno, explain to me what I should have been able to figure out for myself just from knowing distances and sizes. Because the galaxy is about 100,000 light years across, about 100 million light years away. So you should be able to figure out from that how big it is in the sky. I didn't bother to figure out. I thought I was seeing the whole thing. But my friend Guy explained to me that, look, the galaxy of Andromeda, what you're seeing, Paul, he said to me, is just the bright central core, that bright spot in the middle. The rest of it is too dim for our eyes to see, too dim for you to see with a telescope, too dim to see without a long time exposure telegraph. But if we could put, if our eyes were sensitive enough to see the entire galaxy of Andromeda in the sky, it would be this big. Okay, now, this has become a little minor mystery of my life, that this thing is hiding in plain sight. Okay, this beautiful galaxy, which is too dim for our eyes to see, is hiding in plain sight. This has actually become a thing for me to do, is to look where Andromeda is in the sky and not see it. It's become the thing unseen, which is kind of a mystery for me. Because if science works to make mysteries go away, I think what the life of faith is so much about is being alert to points of mystery. In the Catholic tradition, we like to talk about Mary, the mystery of the rosaries. I think of each of those mysteries as being some moment in her life that she remembered, that she was drawn back to, and when she remembered those occasions, she was somehow drawn deeper into contact with God. I think in each of you, in your heart, if you remember your life, if you think, what are the great events of my life that I tend to remember, I think those might be the mysteries of your life. You sort of dwell on those memories and you're drawn deeper and deeper into contact with God. That way of thinking doesn't register with science. It's not that scientists are against that. They're simply, that doesn't fit in the method of science, thinking of mystery that way. Mysteries are something to be solved in science. And that's great. I love solving them. But in the life of faith, mystery is a place to dwell and go deeper. So I've got my own private mystery in the sky, dwelling there unseen. My hope and prayer for you is that every night before you go to bed, as you remember your day and your life, this or that event emerges over time to become a mystery which is leading you closer to God. And there I will. I'm going to pause in a second. I'm going to put the shameless shilling for my book.
That's right, go for it.
Okay. It seems tacky to go from that little reverie mark to shilling for the book, but my colleague Guy Consolmagno and I have a new book out with the awful title, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? It's basically 6 questions about religion and science which you try and deal with in a very popular way. So in this book, I'm trying to be more fun and lighter than I was tonight. But we had fun with this book. It's out on Amazon. Happy to talk about that. I'm done. Thank you very much.
I'm sure that Father Mueller would like some questions to respond to, so we're open for questions.
Please.
How did you answer that question?
The reason for that title is my colleague Guy Consolmagno is being interviewed on radio in Britain, and the interviewer, being puckish, posed that question. And Guy's response was, only if he asks. Which is a good start. My own response is, I'm no theologian, thank you, but I look in my own life to the example of the way Jesus gathered people at the table. symbol in my mind is when Jesus is present, people who could not otherwise sit together at the same table seem to be able to sit together. Jew and Greek, prostitute, tax collector, zealot, somehow Pharisee, they all manage to sit together, at least as long as he's there. When he leaves, they probably start belting it out again. But that's somehow my hope, that if we ever should encounter extraterrestrials, could we somehow be in the presence of Jesus able to sit together, for one thing. And then who knows who's going to invite who to be baptized. They might invite us to be baptized. I don't know. But I'm not offering a theological solution to that so much as just trying to raise it as a little question of how do we think about what our baptism means and what it means to be a Christian community and to include new people or beings in it. Please. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see a shift with a blending of beliefs in terms of the spiritual existence and that of the scientific existence, and then globally, the people to the sort of a paradigm shift and welcoming the two and over a spiritual religious world? Do you see it, say, you do a lot of research, say 20 years ago, it's happened in the past 10 years, and there's more of a need for some answers being answered scientifically that really actually also blends of one's various and different spiritual existences and beliefs?
I'm not sure where to go with that. I guess my own bias is to want to keep those two realms. I'll be the same person doing both science and religion, but I want to keep them distinct. I think of science as being a method which is very constrained. And I think of religion as being, or Christianity as being a way of life that's all-encompassing. So I'm not sure where to go beyond that, except to say that what? I think in this country, we struggle with a lot of polarization on that question. I think less on some other countries, but I'm not sure if I got the, maybe try again. I'm
I'm sort of actually saying quantum physics, a metaphysical existence, with the two, that's what I'm actually saying.
Okay.
So in terms of that whole genre of what the world is
So like books like the Tao of Physics and things like that.
Right.
Yeah, I myself am cautious in that front. I like, let's put it this way. I think the church, Catholic Church, made a heck of a mistake with Galileo by hitching, with Galileo, let's back up 400 years to that example. What was happening, among other things, was that the idea that the earth is motionless at the center of the cosmos became linked in people's minds with the idea that we're at the center of God's care and concern. The scientific thing, which was wrong, became a symbol or an expression of a theological truth. But then when the science changes, it felt to people as if the theological truth was being attacked. So I would want to be cautious about, do I want to use, I think we have no choice but to use the language of science to express theological truth. That's the only language we have, is the language that comes to us out of science. But I think there's need to be light on the feet. So if there's something from quantum physics, I know people use stuff from thermodynamics to try and talk about the nature of evil. People love to use concepts from modern science to try and give expression to various theological truths. But I think it needs to be done with a very light touch. We need to be ready to let go and move on when that particular scientific thing gets proved wrong somewhere. So I just want to carefully separate the doctrines we believe, the truths we believe theologically, from how we express them. So more power to expressing them, but with a light touch. Does that kind of get at it? Great, thanks. Please.
How do you pick the projects, the brothers that you work with? How do they pick them, or are they told what to pick? And when you finish a project, do you publish it? And is it peer reviewed? Or?
Yes. So the goal is, and everyone moves at their own pace. That's how academic life is. But each of these guys is participating in his own specialty, in the professional organization for that specialty. Each one's publishing peer-reviewed papers. So the goal is to be functioning, as far as the discipline is concerned, like any other research institute with functioning scholars, but who happen to also be representing the church in that ambit. So yeah, they're choosing their own projects. This comes out of their own research agendas, typically coming out of who their collaborators, their outside outside collaborators are, because science tends to get done in groups. So each one's got his own circle of outside collaborators and pursues projects with them, and they start their own lifespan. Sir, please.
You have made a good case that both scientists and religious people are finite. But you haven't said anything about the Christian perspective that both scientists and Christians are sinners. How does that conviction we have affect your view of whether or not some scientific projects should not be undertaken because of the potential damage that they should do on the one side? And on the other side, you seem to be rather optimistic that we now don't deny the clear teachings of science, when in fact we do. For example, global warming, et cetera, et cetera. So would you speak to just that kind of perspective?
Fair enough. I'm suffering from a certain starry-eyed optimism there, and maybe using the word "we" a little too promiscuously. Sure, there's plenty of people who are science deniers of various sorts, and that's it. I think that's, I don't want to say, I hesitate to say it's part of that sinfulness you mentioned, but I at least operate with the deep conviction that God made us rational beings, and that when we use our reason, we're serving and imitating God. So to in the name of religion, deny the use of reason seems at least misguided to me, and at times just backwards and perverse. And now, I'm not a meteorologist. I can't do that science for myself. I can read what the best scientists are saying, and like any science, because it's a realm of experts, like we're taking a lot of what they say on faith. You have to trust. You have to trust what the experts. You don't have to. You can choose to trust what the experts say. And I choose to trust what the climate experts say, because I think they're operating within reason. So it saddens me that there's denial of what I would take to be normal, good science. What you do with that science is another question. What do we do morally with it? That's a whole different question. And there you come into talking about how do our governmental structures work, social sinfulness, individual sinfulness, the human propensity to screw things up royally. I just take it as a given that even if we were all perfectly rational agents who believed in the climate science, we would still, out of our sinfulness, find a way to mess up our response. So I'm not sure if that got to the sinful question, but certainly human sinfulness, I guess I will make a connection between that and the doing of science. I think science can be full of errors, not due to sin, just because we're finite beings. I think the sinfulness is going to definitely come in when we make use of what we find out in our science. We're going to try to be better, but we are going to be individually and corporately sinful beings. And it will cause God to cry. I don't know if that got out or not.
Well, I had also in mind nuclear, all of the research in nuclear development and what that has led us to in terms of what we could do now with this world.
Right.
That's the sort of thing that scientists have obviously struggled with that morally.
Yes. And I would not give to the scientists some kind of moral prerogative. I think we look to the scientists to please guide us to know, help us to know what the situation is, what the possibilities are. But you, as a scientist, do not have some special moral claim to make decisions. You need to help inform us so we can decide together in a good way. Please.
Actually, it's not really a question, but it's kind of how it relates to our everyday life. We've just been fairly recently introduced to a $25 light bulb that's supposed to last years and years and years, and the 25-cent light bulbs are being taken away. So we're being sort of forced to believe, forced to buy, and hopefully have to think that a $25 light bulb will last many years, so we have to wait for those years to prove
That's a tough situation for doing the science there. that's a, like we said over here, a case where you've got science feeding the decision making, but the decision itself is a claim separate from the science. Politics, you know, that wonderful morass of politics and morality that we try to live together with. Somehow out of that, whether from interest groups or good decision making, came a decision about light bulbs, which makes sense to someone, but which might not make sense at the ground level when you shell out for that light bulb. And yeah, I don't know if I use the word faith or trust. It's because you can always trip and break that light bulb, and it's a lot less painful to break by accident a 25-cent light bulb. It's a big investment. Please. I'm not quite sure I'm hearing. Let me come closer. Maybe someone could relay that. I just couldn't hear.
The Christian responsibility to respond to these scientific truths for the good of the whole, for the wholeness, for the acknowledgement of the connectivity of us all.
Just that I would very much agree that responsibility exists. We need to be critical, not accept the science uncritically, and try and make sure we've got good science. But once we know what we think is true, we've certainly got a responsibility, not as Christians, as human beings, to try and move beyond just individual interests to the common good. So I don't know if that's what you were getting at or not, but
Are you optimistic?
am I optimistic about that? Oh, no, but I'm hopeful. Let me distinguish. I'm not optimistic, but I am hopeful. I think that to be my Christian stance. I'm very, very hopeful pessimist. Because I think Christianity is fundamentally about living in hope. This is another little science-religion thing. I think one way that I kind of dice it and slice it, we say science makes claims about what is true, probabilistically what it takes to be true. And I can believe those things with a certain probability. My Christian faith doesn't exactly make those same kind of truth claims. My Christian faith orients me to live in the hope that certain things are true. So, as a Christian, I live in the hope that Christ rose from the dead and saved us. As a rational, I hope, citizen among others, I try to make my best rational judgments about what seems to be true, and then to respond to them with hope and pessimism.
Is there one more question? No. Let's say thank you.
And I thank you very much. And I live in the hope that there will be another religion and science roundtable sometime in January or February. We had a good lead on that, but it turned into some more good leads instead of the person we were hoping to become. He just didn't feel like it was the right thing for him to do. But so we're still working on that, so just stay tuned, and we will hope to have a religion and science roundtable in either January or February, and then another one later in the spring. For now, that concludes the program. Thank you all so much for coming, and hope you'll come back.